Hello, everyone. That fabulous piece of music was Levi Jackson Rag. The composer is Pat Shaw, and the dance is Levi Jackson Rag. You know we love it. Well, most of us love it. That was the McLean family band: Michael, Ruth, Raymond W., Raymond K., Alice McLean, and Al White. And that was the Country Dance album. You can buy it directly from the McLeans at the McLean Family Band Square site. We're posting a link for it now. And I am Darlene Hamilton. We are the Historical Tea and Dance Society, and happy to be back again with you all. On our team, we have Lindsay Verbal assisting with the program, handling media and our attendee questions. We have Reed Wilson monitoring Zoom for questions and posting, and Larry Hansen monitoring Facebook live chat for questions and postings. I have a great team. We invite you to post questions in those chat boxes on both platforms, Zoom and Facebook. I think by now you know where to find those. And please go ahead and put in your questions, and we will get to them as much as possible in the after talk. I think this talk is going to be pretty full, so probably no questions during the web chat. But stick around for that link to the after talk. If you registered for our web chat, then you will already have that link. We have to send just a wonderful thank you, heartfelt thank you to Karen Axelrod and Kate Barnes for that amazing In the Moment concert. Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. You know how we love your concerts. All right, let me jump into a bio about our guest. This is a brief bio, believe it or not brief, in which you will be hearing much more about many of these items throughout this hour. Bob Dalsemer started dancing in 1969 when his friends took him to Berea's Christmas Country Dance School. He liked this so well that he began dancing locally in Baltimore and attended Pinewoods the following summer. And in 1972, he began calling. In 1975, he co-founded the Baltimore Folk Music Society, a nonprofit organization that preserves and promotes folk music, dance, and tradition. In 1992, he moved to Brasstown, North Carolina, and became coordinator of music and dance programs at the John C. Campbell Folk School, a position he held for over 20 years. He was president of CDSS, Country Dance and Song Society, from 1990 to 96, and received CDSS's Lifetime Contribution Award in 2011. Bob is a teacher, a caller, a musician, a dancer, an organizer, and we are honored to have him with us on this winter solstice night. Please welcome Bob Dalsemer.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Oh, it's so good to have you with us. We
Happy,
are going, oh, sorry.
happy solstice.
We're going to jump right into the things and see where they take us. So, thing number one, ECD and the founding of the folk school.
Yes, one of my favorite topics. The folk school will, in a couple of years, celebrate its 100th anniversary. It was founded in 1925. And one of the questions people often ask me is, who was John C. Campbell anyway? And so I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was the son of a Scottish immigrant who came to the US to work on the railroads. His father started out as a master mechanic and eventually became superintendent of several railroads in the Midwest. And John was a very bright young man. They sent him out to the East Coast for his education. He attended Williams College and then went to Andover Theological Seminary. And instead of becoming ordained, he decided to apply to the American Missionary Association, and they sent him to Appalachia. First to a small school in northern Alabama, and then to another school in East Tennessee. And eventually they decided to send him to a college in North Georgia. He was only in his early 30s, and the college was in terrible financial condition, and they made him president, which was probably his undoing. He had a heart condition, and so he worked there for a few years trying to raise money and trying to keep things together. He developed a very strong attraction to Appalachian people and the region. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And his health deteriorated to the point where his doctor told him he needed to take time off. So he decided to take a trip to Scotland to visit his father's family. And I guess fortuitously, on the boat on the way over, he met a family from New England, the Dame family. And it was Mrs. Dame and her two daughters, one of whom was named Olive. Well, they were very much taken with John. He was a charming man and had many great stories to tell about his time in the mountains. There's a picture of John, good looking gentleman. And so they actually managed to travel together some in the British Isles and book passage on the same boat coming back. And as Olive says in her diary, by the time there's Olive, by the time they got back, they were practically engaged. Well, they did get married. They went back to North Georgia, to Demorest, Georgia, to Piedmont College. And they were trying to decide what to do next. And John heard about a new philanthropic organization called the Russell Sage Foundation. And he applied to the Russell Sage Foundation to do a study of social and economic conditions in the mountains and recommend ways that things could be made better. So in 1907 and 1908, he and Olive took off, sometimes by train, sometimes in a wagon, sometimes on horseback, sometimes on foot, and they traveled throughout the Appalachian region. In the course of their travels, while John was interviewing all kinds of people, they stayed in people's homes for the most part, and John was getting a good idea of various conditions in the mountains. Olive, in the meantime, became quite fascinated with the ballads that she was hearing people sing, and she started to take them down. And this led a few years later to her meeting Cecil Sharp. And this was the beginning of a long friendship between Sharp and both of the Campbells, actually. Cecil Sharp was staying actually in Massachusetts with Mrs. Starrow. Now, some of you might know that Mrs. Starrow was the person who originally owned the land on which Pinewoods Camp is. and donated, eventually gave the land to the Conant family. And the Conant family then gave it to a nonprofit organization called Pinewoods Camp, Inc. So anyway, Mrs. Starrow was hosting Cecil Sharp, and Olive went to her house, knocked on the door, and was told that Cecil Sharp was indisposed, that he had gout, but somehow she managed to talk her way in and show him her ballad collection, and he immediately felt better. And in fact, he was very enthusiastic about it, ended up years later arranging to come over and make several trips to the Appalachians to collect. A lot of that was facilitated by the Campbells and also Mrs. Starrow, I should add. So you can already see a connection between Cecil Sharp, the folk school, and Pinewoods Camp. Anyway, so John Campbell, as a result of his study of the mountains, made two very important contributions. He studied, he asked people what they wanted, and what they wanted most was education for their kids. And secondly, he decided that there had to be some way to better coordinate all the church groups that were doing missionary work in the mountains. There were probably a dozen different groups, and they were really working at cross purposes. So he thought there must be some way we can coordinate all these people that are doing this work. Well, in fact, the report that they made to the Russell Sage Foundation had such an effect that the Russell Sage Foundation hired John to be their southeastern representative, and he and Olive moved to Asheville, North Carolina. And during that time, they met Cecil Sharp several times, kind of pointed him in various directions towards singers, and there's quite a correspondence between the Campbells and Cecil Sharp. And in fact, when Cecil Sharp got ready to publish his collection of ballads called English Folk Songs in the Southern Appalachians, he made, for the first edition, he made Olive Campbell his co-author. But unfortunately, somehow in subsequent editions, her name was dropped, and she never complained, I have to say. During their travels in the mountains, they heard about a very progressive idea that was going on in Denmark called the Danish folk schools. And it impressed them, and they thought this would be a perfect thing for the mountains, a short-term, non-formal kind of education for young people, for the most part, young adults, I should say. And they wanted to go and visit these folk schools. Unfortunately, World War I broke out, and they couldn't go. And in 1919, John Campbell's heart condition caught up with him. He had a heart attack and died at the age of 52. So they didn't get to go. Well, Olive kind of put that on the back burner and decided that eventually she was going to go and visit the folk schools. And in 1922, she finally made up her mind to do it. And she invited a young woman teacher from Pine Mountain Settlement School that she had met, named Marguerite Butler, to join her. There's a picture of Marguerite. And they went and spent about a year visiting folk schools in Denmark and other Scandinavian countries. On their way back, they stopped in England and visited Cecil Sharp. And Marguerite took Cecil Sharp's summer dance class and learned English country dancing and learned to call. And when they got back, they decided they were going to found a folk school. And by golly, they looked around and looked around for places to put it. And at one point, Marguerite visited Murphy, North Carolina, and met a gentleman from Brasstown named Fred O. Scroggs. I think we have a picture. There's Fred. Fred, initial O. Now everybody called him Fred O. And Fredo was a wheeler dealer of the first order. And he decided that the idea of a school in Brasstown was a great idea. And he went so far as to organize all the people in Brasstown to come to a meeting at the Brasstown church and invited Marguerite to come. And he had them all sign pledges of materials, of money, of hours of work to build the folk school. And that's how the folk school got to Brasstown. So I'm going to end thing one, I think, right there.
That was great. Thank you. Wow. All right. Thing number two. The folk school and Berea College.
Okay. Well, the folk school started in 1925. It took several years. For the most part, the first couple of years, it was mostly local people that got to take classes at the folk school. But by about 1927, they had actually started taking students that would board there for usually a period between November and March. The folk school was a farm school when it first started. It was a working farm. And Mrs. Campbell hired a young man from Denmark named George Bidstrup to come and be the farm manager and teach the local folks modern dairy farming techniques. Denmark really was quite well ahead of people in the mountains in their dairy farming. And George Bidstrup was only in his early 20s, I think, when he first came. So in addition to being a knowledgeable farm manager, George Bidstrup also had gone to a folk school in Denmark and was quite well versed in Danish folk dances. So Danish folk dancing and English folk dancing were things that were done for recreation at the folk school in the very early days. Of course, there's a Danish folk dance, and right in the very front on the left side is George Bidstrup. And so in addition to English dances and Danish dances, I think they also did a lot of singing games. And in fact, because of the local churches not exactly being very happy about dancing in general, they had these gatherings on Friday nights, and they called them the Friday Night Games. And that went on until the 1940s. During this time, another gentleman that Mrs. Campbell and Marguerite Butler had met in Denmark was an Englishman named Frank Smith. He and his wife were in fact teaching at an international school in Denmark, and he eventually came over here. I think he was at the folk school for a very short time, and then they sent him to Berea. And while he was in Berea, he founded what we now call the Recreation Extension. And he traveled around to different schools in the mountains doing all sorts of recreational activities, including dance. And eventually, Berea hired him full-time as the director of the Recreation Extension. And he started doing research on local Appalachian square dancing, eventually published a book called The Appalachian Square Dance, and founded the Berea Country Dancers, which was, and still is, I guess, a crack demonstration group that travels all over the country performing. In 1930, the folk school decided to begin a recreation leaders course that ran in the summers for 10 days. And this was an opportunity for a lot of people from the mountain area and the Southeast in general to come and learn English country dancing, Danish country dancing. They did some of Cecil Sharp's quote unquote running set, and some local square dance styles. And this was quite a a training ground for a lot of people that went on to various kinds of various parts of the mountains and became recreation leaders in schools. There's a Danish dance at the folk school. In 1935, the folk school helped Berea found the Mountain Folk Festival, which still going today, more than 50 years. It's a dance weekend for high school and middle school age children, and it's still going today. In 1938, they helped Berea found the Christmas Country Dance School, which is also still going today, except for last year and this year, unfortunately. So the folk school had a big role in getting programs started at Berea. Both George and Marguerite Beach, well, George married Marguerite Butler, and the Beedstrips as a couple were on committees that helped start both the Mountain Folk Festival and the Christmas School. They also went to Pinewoods in the summers. So I think that just about wraps up thing 2.
Okay. I was wondering, could I ask you a little bit? I know you said that these schools were very important for spreading English country. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think it's largely because of, and this is kind of getting into thing 3, if you like.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, of course, that's perfect then. Let me just jump into thing 3.
Yeah.
That's exactly how we like it to flow. All right.
The summer reading course that started in 1930, as time went on, it became what was called the June Dance Week.
And that is thing number 3, the June Dance Week.
And the folk schools in Denmark usually have a term of 3 to 6 months during the winter. And then during the summer, they will have week-long classes that they call short courses. So the June Dance Week was basically a short course. The June Dance Week continued up until about 1982 or 3, I think, and became one of the places to go in the Southeast to go to dance in the summertime. You could go to Pinewoods or you could go to Brasstown. These were the 2 places. And then there was Berea Christmas School. So those were the 3 main places that you got to go to dance. So, and there is a picture of, that is Berea Christmas School about when I started dancing there. That was probably about 1969 or 1970, that picture. I think we also have a picture of a square dance at the folk school in the 1940s. I don't know if you've seen that one yet. Lindsay, I don't know if you can find that one, but we could take a look at that one too. Yeah, there we go. So in the summertime, they had the June Dance Week. There was also a recorder week. There was a craft week and some other things. But the dance week really was, that was the place in the summer that live music was at the folk school. During the winter time, they had dances. They still had dances on Friday night. But for the most part, they were with recorded music. But during the summer, Philip Merrill, who was the music director of the Country Dance Society, would come down for a month or so. Otto and Marguerite Wood, 2 wonderful musicians who were originally from Michigan, but then lived in Florida during the winter time. They would come up every summer and play. And a number of the recorder teachers would also play. So there was a great live music in the summertime at the folk school, and particularly for the June Dance Week. Now, during this time also, I should say that there were, because of the influence of the Mountain Folk Festival at Berea, there was always a team of young people from Brasstown that would go to that weekend. And in addition, they formed a demonstration group, kind of like a junior edition of the Berea Country Dancers, who would go around and dance at various festivals, including, I believe, the Mountain Folk Festival in Asheville, and certainly at some of the craft fairs that were around the area. But during the 1960s and 1970s, there was quite an active group of young people from Brasstown that did country dancing, Morris, sword, Kentucky running set, a little bit of everything, kind of like the Berea Country Dancers. And they were quite good. So during the 60s and 70s, John Ramsey was the director at the folk school. He succeeded George Beedstra as director, and John was a former Berea country dancer, a Berea graduate, a dance caller, dance leader. And I think the dancing really thrived under John's directorship. And then John went to Berea after Brasstown and replaced Ethel Capps when she retired as head of the Recreation Extension and director of the Berea Country Dancers. So that's about most of what I have for thing 3. And I think that sort of describes the connection between the folk school and Berea. A lot of exchange going on there.
Yeah, that's amazing, because it's not that close, really. It's a few hours away, isn't it?
5 hours, I can tell you from experience.
Yeah, and that's 5 hours by modern time. It was probably longer than that.
The other connection that you might find interesting, particularly those of you that are into folk music, is Mrs. Campbell hired a gentleman from Belgium named Leon Deschamps to come to the folk school. He was a forester and an expert in various kinds of construction. He married May Ritchie, who was one of Jean Ritchie's oldest sisters. And so many summers, Jean and one of her sisters would come and visit the folk school. And interestingly enough, there's a picture in our history center taken when I think Jean was still a teenager, with she and her sister Edna as part of a puppetry class with a bunch of women or girls and their puppets. And at one point, the McLean family was visiting, and Mrs. McLean, Alice and Al's mother-in-law, was going through, and I pointed out that picture, and she said, "Oh, and that's me," standing beside them. So yeah, Jean actually spent many summers at the folk school. We have some great pictures of her there.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, so thing number 4.
Oh, yes.
My intro to country dance at Berea, Pine Woods, Baltimore, and Brasstown. We're going to learn all about you this time.
Well, I had gotten interested in folk music as a teenager in my early teens, and learned to play guitar and banjo. And I think this was in 1969. I was doing some volunteer work at the American Friends Service Committee in Baltimore, and one of the people that worked there, a relatively new employee, was a young man named Howard Evans, said, "You know, my wife and I have been down to this amazing week in Kentucky where they do dancing, and it's called the Berea Christmas Country Dance School. You might really like that." And I said, "Really?" And so they dragged me down there, and I had an amazing time. And in fact, I got there a little before they did, and I was standing in line, and I said to the guy, I had my banjo with me. I saw a guy with a fiddle case in front of me, and I said, "Hey, you want to room together?" And he said, "Okay." Well, that was Jim Morrison. So Jim and I became good friends that first time at Berea, and I just had an amazing week there. I had no idea what was going on. I got dragged through a million dances and was completely confused, but had a wonderful time. And I thought, well, this is really something. And while I was there, I met a couple who were graduates of Berea College and former Berea country dancers, John and Mary Owen. And they told me, "Oh yeah, we live in Baltimore and we have a little group there. You should come and dance with us." And so I did. And the next summer they took me to Pine Woods. So I just got very, very involved very quickly. Well, a couple years after that, they left town, and we wanted to keep the dancing going. So I sort of took over the group and found another place to dance in my neighborhood, and started a little dance group kind of on my own. And some of the people that had been dancing with us still came and danced. And eventually, I met a fellow that I enjoyed playing music with named Michael Quitt, and the two of us decided to found the Baltimore Folk Music Society. Well, we started actually with my dance group and a little concert series that we put together. And a couple of years after that, we decided, well, that was too much work for us, so we better get some of our friends to help us. And we did. So we put together, 1975, I think we put together the Baltimore Folk Music Society. And that became kind of the organization that sponsored both our dances and our concerts. And it's still going today, I'm happy to say. So, and I think I've seen a few comments flash up on the screen of people from that area. So, yep. So, but not dancing. Yeah, I know. That's too bad, but it will start again. Anyway, yeah, so I was kind of in on the beginning of the dance revival in the Baltimore, Washington area. And after I had been teaching in Baltimore for a while, some folks from the Folklore Society of Greater Washington invited me to come over there and teach a class. I don't know, it might have been 6 or 8 weeks, weekly session. And the folks that did that liked it so much that even after the Folklore Society decided that they didn't want to continue to sponsor it anymore, they wanted to continue anyway. So we kept going, and we got some great. That's when I met Steve Hickman, and Steve and I go back a long way. And I think one of the reasons that I've been able to do as much as I've been done with calling in that area is because I've had Steve to play for it. And Steve is one of the few people I know that can play just about any kind of music and smile the whole time. So, so that was basically what happened. I spent a year, 1978, 79, in West Virginia as artist in residence in Randolph County, and that's when I did all my research on West Virginia squares. Came back to Baltimore and continued for a while, and then I started going to Brasstown in the early 80s. Genevieve Scheimer invited me to teach at the June Week initially. And then I started going back quite a bit. And that kind of brings me to Winter Dance Week and my present employment or retirement from the employment. Yes.
All right. Thing number 5, Winter Dance Week, 1980 to the present.
Yeah, Berea, in the late 1970s, the Christmas school was so popular that they were turning lots of people away that wanted to go. They just didn't have room, even though, I don't know what they can take, I don't know, 300 people or something there now, but they didn't have that kind of space then. I don't know what the limit was, but they had definitely reached it. And a lot of people were not too happy that they didn't get to go because there was a waiting list to get into Christmas Country Dance School. So Berea put out a plea for other organizations to start dance weeks during that same time period to kind of take the pressure off. And the folk school decided to meet the call, and they asked Jim Morrison if he would put together a winter dance week. And I think Jim, with some help from Laura Sprung, who was in residence at the folk school at the time, I think they kind of put together, I think the first one was 1980. That's my recollection. And Jim's idea when he first started it was that in order to be different from Berea, that it would focus mainly on American dance and music. He had started the American Dance and Music Week at Pinewoods, and that had turned out to be very popular. I see Jim just put up that it was actually 1979. So thank you, Jim. So the idea was it was going to be an American dance week, dance and music week, to make it different. And of course, the folk school has a much smaller venue than Berea. I think the folk school is pretty much limited to maybe 90 dancers, something like that, because of the space that's available. And so that started up in, and it turned out to be quite popular. And it was a great week. And a few years after that, I was asked to coordinate it. And so I don't know how many winter dance weeks I've been to altogether, but probably more than 3/4, I would guess, since 1980. I went to work at the folk school in 1991. And I think the next year after that, or maybe several years after that, I decided, well, a lot of the local dancers really missed English country dancing and wanted to do English as well as American. So we decided to have English and maybe some Morrison sword as well as part of the program of Winter Dance Week, starting in the 1990s. And it's been very interesting to see that because when we first did it, we would get lots of complaints from some of the regular attendees who would say, too much English, not enough contra. Well, in the last maybe 5 years or so, it's gone the opposite way. And people have said, too much contra, not enough English. So anyway, one of the things that happened over time too was that because English was so popular, and it also meant that we did have a second dance space available. When we first started, the only real dance space that was available indoors anyway was the community room at the folk school. In a little while, we'll see some video of that. But pretty soon after 1990, oh, there's some video we got right there, I think. Well, there's a still picture. This is the community room. This is our community room, which is, this building was completed in 1927. It's got a wonderful wood floor. It's got great acoustics. It's not huge. It has really a capacity of maybe, I mean, it gets pretty crowded with more than 70 people. There's another picture of the community room. So shortly after 1991, when Jan Davidson became director, we completed a new building with a music studio. And the music studio could also serve as a secondary dance space. And it's a lovely dance space. And I think we have a picture that there's the community room. And in the background, you can see a wonderful backdrop for the Brasstown Follies, which is the skit night that we have every year, thanks to Carl Dreyer. And Carl is also, not only do we have English dancing at Winter Dance Week, we also have an English dance weekend in April or May every year. And hopefully that'll happen, we hope, this year. And then also, mainly due to Carl Dreyer's organizing, we have we did have a monthly English country dance with live music. It was very small, but very lovely. And I think that's been going on for quite a few years. Carl will have to remind me how many, but so English country dance is back in Brasstown. We hope it will be back as soon as dancing continues. And I do want to say a little bit about New Year's Eve at the Folk School. Winter Dance Week is kind of special in a way because the evening dances that take place in the community room are open to the community. So it's a big event for not only for the people that attend, but also for the community. And people that are regular attendees get to know folks in the community, and it becomes a real community in that sense. A lot of friendships are made. So New Year's Eve is kind of a special occasion. We kind of modeled our New Year's Eve on Berea to start with. And I don't know if you've ever been to Berea on New Year's Eve, but at least when I was going there, the thing that would happen at midnight would be that Pat Napier would be the caller, and he would do a big set, big circle Appalachian dance. And at the end of it, he would get down on the floor and wind up the big circle until everybody was in the middle. And then it was New Year's Eve. It was New Year's. And Pat, I always said to Pat, how do you know exactly when it's 12? And he said, well, it's 12 when I say it is. So it was always a little interesting there. But the big thing about Brasstown is we don't have room really if we have 100 people in there on New Year's Eve often, and it's just way too crowded to do any kind of a wind up circle. So you'll see in the video that we have that I just do kind of an Appalachian scatter promenade type dance, and then have everybody promenade into the middle. The main thing about our community room is that there's a room above it that's reached from an attic, and we drop down balloons at midnight. And in fact, when Jan Davidson was director, he would always get a whole bunch of local kids up there. In fact, even before he was director, he would get a whole bunch of local kids up there. They'd blow up a whole bunch of balloons and drop them down on the crowd. And for a while, we were also dropping confetti. But things have kind of gone back and forth over the years. Sometimes people would be upset because when we drop balloons, the kids would start stomping on them and there'd be all kinds of noise. So we got some complaints about that. So then we were told we could just drop confetti, no balloons. So we did that for a few years. And then the fire marshal told us that that was dangerous because the confetti would get caught up in the light fixtures and was a fire hazard. So we've gone back to balloons. Anyway, so I think we do have a little bit of video of New Year's Eve. And I'm not sure, this is probably 10 years ago, maybe. But anyway, it gives you an idea of what you can expect on New Year's Eve at the Folk School. Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about what happens after that. There is a tradition in Brasstown after midnight that everybody puts their coats on and goes outside, and the Brasstown Brigade comes to the folk school. And this is actually a real old tradition from central North Carolina that was brought to Brasstown. The Brasstown Brigade has black powder muskets, and they have a chant that they do, which is a blessing on the new year to ward off the evil spirits, and they shoot off their black powder muskets. And then we all go inside and we dance Sellinger's Round is the first dance, and we dance Chorus Jig is the second dance, and then we all go party after that. So hopefully those days will come again. But I do want to say a few things. I do want to thank a few folks. It's been a real pleasure being here. And I particularly want to thank Olivia Barry, whose idea was to do this and got me in touch with you, Darlene. And I'd like to thank particularly Darlene and Lindsay and their crew for making this a real fun experience. And also, I had a lot of help from the folk school. Heather Googler and Travis Souther got me all those great pictures and videos. And of course, Jerry Jackson, who's the director of the folk school, and Carl Dreyer for all his input and support over the years with Winter Dance Week and English country dance in general, and rapper. So thank you, Carl. And I think that's about all, unless you have, I'll be happy to answer questions and see everybody in the chat.
Well, we are definitely going to have more to talk about in the chat, that's for sure, because you are obviously a very humble person, because you spent a lot of time talking about all these wonderful events and things. And, you know, you're a teacher, a musician, a dancer, organizer, all this stuff. So I definitely want to talk more about some of that, and also your books that you wrote on traditional squares. I'm fond of them. And yeah, I was wondering if we have a couple extra minutes, so I'm going to ask this now. I was going to ask you about it in the after talk, but you've worked a lot with younger people, and I know before the pandemic we were all talking about engaging younger people in this, you know, in dance and bringing more younger people in. And then the pandemic happened, and nobody's thinking about that right now, but I am, because I know it's coming around the corner. Oops. And so is Lindsay's cat. I was just wondering if you might speak to us a little bit about that, because I know you've worked with so many kids. So any advice for us that want to do that and bring people in?
I don't know how you recruit. I've been lucky that I've come across groups of young people that I've been able to work with. Of course, I was a caller for the Mountain Folk Festival for, I guess, about 10 years, and took groups from Brasstown there. And we have had, as you can probably see from that last New Year's Eve thing, we have a lot of young people involved in the dancing. Now it tends to run in waves. You know, there'll be a period of 3 or 4 years where we'll have an amazing group of young people, and then they all go off to college, and it's sort of, we don't see any for a while, and then another group might come in. So I think it just goes in waves. Of course, in Brasstown, there's not much else to do, so we were fortunate, and I think the folk school actually has always been kind of an attraction there.
Yeah, well, that is true. I grew up in a small town, and you know, when there's certain things to do, I know what that's like. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Normally at this point in time, we would talk about announcements for you. However, what we really wanted to talk a little bit about that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet is Dancing Well the Soldiers Project, which is you're very much involved in. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, it's a wonderful organization that I've been fortunate to be. I've been on the board for a number of years now. Um, Deborah Denenfeld has put together this organization that's geared to helping servicemen and women and veterans with problems with PTSD. I got involved because after I retired, I became a volunteer with the Guardian Ad Litem program. Sometimes it's called Court Appointed Special Advocate for Children in Foster Care. And I took some workshops on trauma and how trauma affects people, and how the idea of physical activity is very good for helping people with trauma. And as soon as I encountered this in some of the workshops, and I had sort of heard about Deborah's organization, I thought, well, this is perfect. This is it. And another thing that really helps is social connection. So country dance is just perfect for that. And Deborah has really been just amazing in her advocacy for that group. And she has gotten a very involved group in the Louisville area. And she's now in the process of trying to develop leadership materials to train other people to be able to do this kind of work. It's really valuable. And she's actually had a study done which shows how effective that it is. So, and I understand you're going to have Deborah on 5 Things at some point.
I was absolutely going to jump in and mention that we are going to have her coming up in a few months. I know that she's working on something and we're going to time it out so it's a good connection. So we're very much looking forward to that. Yeah, because that's an amazing project that I've been hearing about. So I am looking forward to hearing more. We can't let you go without asking what your favorite dance is. And I'm going to follow it up with another question after that.
Well, that's like asking who your favorite child is. I think I think for English country dances, I have to say that I'm very partial to brisk tempo triple minors. Orleans Baffled, which you're going to probably hear some music shortly for, and another one that I like is Hambleton's Roundo. Again, a triple minor at a fairly brisk tempo. I love Newcastle. If you got a minute, I got a funny story about Newcastle. I was in England. I got invited to call for a week at Halsey Manor a number of years ago, and I was, of course, the American caller. And they were doing some English dances, and they announced that they were going to do Newcastle for those who knew it. And I don't think they had any idea that I had ever done any English dancing, but I knew Newcastle. So I jumped in, and of course I got through it, and I was very proud of myself. And then they said, okay, everybody move one place to the right and change places with your partner. So all the men were dancing the women's part, and they repeated the dance, and whoops, I lost it. It was great.
Wow, that's a great story. I love that. That's dancing the whole dance for sure. Now, you're also a musician, so I have to ask you, what's your favorite tune? What tune brings you great joy?
Gosh. Oh, Lord. I really can't. I haven't thought about that. And again, that would just be way too many tunes to think about. It's probably the one I'm playing at any given time. The other dances that I thought about, of course, Levi Jackson Rag, which we started this session with. Pat Shaw's dance is wonderful. And the other Pat Shaw dance, when I first started dancing, that I loved and still do, was Margaret's Waltz. We don't do it very often anymore.
That's a great dance. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, Bob, we're looking forward to getting into the after talk. So I'm going to jump into the thank yous. Thank you so much for being with us, and to your support team that you mentioned earlier, Heather and Travis, and there were a couple other people I hadn't realized, and Olivia Barry for recommending you to me. And to our 5 Things team, Lindsay Verbal in the background, Ree Wilson on Zoom, Larry Hansen on Facebook, who have been capturing all of your questions, along with helpers Kara King and Dan Vilter. You can all watch our past 5 Things web chat. You can find the link on our website or on the cdss.org website at the community 5 Things page. Web chats are also available on Facebook on our main page and on our YouTube channel. The after talk sessions are not publicly available. However, you may request a link to any after talk that you'd like by emailing us at our email address. And a big thank you to all you folks who have been sending in donations to our group, the Historical Tea and Dance Society. It helps to pay the operating expenses, so we definitely appreciate that. We do have a thing. We have our 5 Things pin. We brought it back. So if you want one of yours, we will post how you can get one. And Bob, you'll be getting one for being a guest on our show. We are posting the After Talk link right now. And also, if you are not able to grab the chat, which some people aren't, we have a Dropbox folder. It's in the registration email, so you can find out about that, how to get that through either emailing us or checking the registration that you did. Coming up next month on January 18th, we have Mike Richardson. Michael is a Seattle musician. He's a dancer, caller, composer, choreographer, organizer of Contra Square and English dances. Between musical gigs, his day job is being a professor of radiology at the University of Washington School of Medicine. So another wonderful person joining us. We are opening registration now. On Fridays, we still do our tea time at 5 p.m. Pacific. It's a social hour of friendship and fun. So if you're looking to, just connect with some people, join us. We're posting the link for that. Other events, please feel free to post, but I want to mention the Bringing Back the Light Poetry and Music for the Season. That's happening tomorrow night. We are going to post a link for that. Poet Lynn Unger, violinist Shira Kamen, and pianist Karen Axelrod will be all together in that Zoom. It's going to be pretty spectacular. For donations, Bob recommends you donate to the John C. Campbell Folk School, the Dancing Well the Soldiers Project, and Country Dances Song Society. All very, very needed organizations in our life. So feel free to donate to them. And for our exit music, it is Orleans Baffled, as Bob told us. We will see you all in just 2 minutes in the after talk. Bye.